Hello and welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Zandi. I'm the chief economist of Moody's Analytics, and I'm joined by my two colleagues, Ryan Sweet, who's head of real-time economics, whiz with the data, and we'll come back to that in just a second. Chris Dorides, the deputy chief economist. And we have and I should have said something nice about you, Chris, too. Sorry about that. Chris knows a lot about... I don't need to? Okay, then I won't.
It's fine.
Yeah. And we're also joined by a special guest, Jim Parrott. Jim and I have been working together. Jim, this is a quiz. What was the first paper we ever co-authored? Do you know?
Oh, actually, I think that's an easy. I think I can get that one. I think it's opening the credit box, right? Wasn't that the first?
That's it. Do you happen to remember the year?
Yeah, because it's when I left. So it would have been 2013?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember the month?
Oh, geez. Well, come on, you're pushing it. Let's see. Let me think about this. So when I left the White House, I went into hiding for, I don't know, 6 months. So maybe July, August, something like that.
Yeah, that's when we wrote it. We actually published it in September of 2013, opening the credit box. Because back then, of course, the issue was coming out of the financial crisis, credit was still pretty tight.
And you know, I hated that title, even though the credit box thing got to be a thing. And the reason is it evoked Pandora's box to me. I thought, oh God, we don't want to open that box. That seems like a terrible thing to open.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it stuck. Like opening the credit box became like a thing. Like we didn't talk in terms of really the credit box even. That we've taken that for granted since, but that wasn't really a term so much until that paper. And so I was wrong. My Pandora box confusion or concern was misplaced, it turned out.
I think we coined that term, credit box. I'm pretty sure.
I think so.
Yeah, I think we did. And we've written just a lot of papers since then. I mean, we actually I should do this, go back and just take a look. But, you know, can I ask you this? What was your favorite paper that we wrote?
Oh, goodness. You know, it's probably this series of papers we did on GSU reform, just because we got to actually come up with a soup to nuts kind of plan, which was fun. I mean, actually doing the whole whiteboard king for a day, what would you do? Beginning to end was kind of fun, as opposed to complaining about what somebody else is doing, which we often do, or like haggling around the edges of some issue. We got to sort of build the car out from the beginning to end, which is kind of fun. So probably that series, I think.
I totally agree. I think we wrote 4 papers around that, the promising road papers. And I'm sorry for the listener. I didn't even introduce you. I just took it for granted that, So Jim is at the Urban Institute, has his own firm with Bob Ryan, a former official at the senior official at FHFA, the regulator for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and is just very well known and very well respected in Washington, particularly in housing and housing finance circles. And before that, you were in the White House. So you mentioned that. Were you on NEC? Were you in the national?
Yeah. I was the housing guy at the NEC.
NEC, kind of like what Parrott is doing now.
Yeah, although Parrott covers a broader range of issues than I did. I came in after the team was pretty well fleshed out, and so there was like a manufacturing guy and an energy guy and a small business gal and so forth. So I was sort of the housing person. At this point, it's much more thinly staffed, and so you've got a few people covering lots of issues. Back then, at least when I showed up, it was a little more fully formed than that.
Well, of course, housing in that period was like front and center, right? I mean, that was the financial crisis. So
yeah, it was a mess.
Yeah, it was a mess. And even going before that, you were at FHA. You were senior advisor to
Sean, to Secretary Donovan. Yeah. I was sort of a roving. I joined to be his advisor on whatever he needed help with, and it just turned out that the first big mess that he needed help with was FHA. That they had discovered from their accountant that they were going to go below the statutory minimum capital level. And so Sean said, what is that exactly? You know, the MMI fund. He wasn't even quite sure, nor was I sure what any of that meant. And so Dave Stevens happened to be joining at the same time as head of FHA. He knew almost as little as I did. So the two of us together had to hold lots and lots of meetings to figure out what earth was going on. And so I think if there had been like a public housing crisis in sort of June of 2009, I would have become maybe a public housing person, but instead it happened to be a housing finance mess. And so here I am.
Did you know that for that actuarial report FHA puts it together every year, they use our forecasts, our interest rate forecasts.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah, right. So, and I didn't know that until someone told me, and they've been doing it for a couple of years. Turns out if the interest rate forecast changes, not by very much.
Oh, it's dramatic.
It's dramatic.
Yeah, well, it affects HECM dramatically, which in turn affects everything else. So
yeah, HECM being the reverse mortgage, a program that FHA runs, and prior to that, how did you even get into Washington?
That's a.
I don't know if I even asked you that question.
No, I'll try to make that a brief story that is less meandering than the reality that it will describe. But so my wife was dying to get back to DC. We live in Chapel Hill and lived in Chapel Hill then, and I was a sort of civil litigator down here and had been a civil litigator up at Sullivan Cromwell in New York. And I knew that whatever I would do in DC, it couldn't be, a white shoe law firm gig again. And so I thought, well, what does one do in DC? Well, you go do political stuff and policy stuff, but I had no background in either. And luckily that was 2008. And I loved Obama as a candidate at that point. And I thought, well, I'll go see if they need help over on the campaign. I'd never done any campaign work or anything, and talked my way into the North Carolina campaign office, which is not too far away. Talked my way into the director of policy position for the state of North Carolina in the general election, and that obviously went well. And then when the madness of job searches happened once Obama won, housing just seemed like the most interesting thing to sort of do at the time. I had no background in housing whatsoever. Literally, if you looked at my resume, the word housing wouldn't have been on there anywhere. And but it just seemed like that would be the most interesting place to be. And so I thought, well, where does one go to do that? And I thought, well, I guess you either go to Treasury or HUD. And I thought, oh goodness, there are bound to be lots of people that want to go to Treasury. They'll put me in a basement if I can get in at all. But HUD, I mean, maybe there's an angle there. So I put all of what minimal resources and juice I had on getting into HUD. And so I managed to get into HUD, and the chief of staff at HUD, looking at my resume, also noticed that the word housing wasn't on there. And she said, well, what do we do with you? And I said, honestly, I don't care. As long as I get to answer to the secretary, we'll figure it out. And so suddenly, that seemed to work. And they put me, my first job title, I discovered this cleaning out the attic the other day, because you get like a little certificate.
Yeah.
I was special assistant to the Office of Administration, which didn't actually exist. That is, there was no assistant secretary. It was like a Kafka-esque sort of, non-agency within a non-building sort of thing. But it's where they put me because that's where funding was or something. I'm not sure I quite followed. And so I, walked into my job the first day and went and visited Sean. And it just so happened, as he's trying to figure out what on earth to do with me, that this FHA mess hit his desk about the same time I walked in, and he had no idea what else to do with me. So he said, go meet this guy, Dave Stevens, and figure out what to do.
Oh my gosh. That's a great story.
Isn't that random? Utterly circuitous.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness it happened that way, because otherwise we wouldn't have written the dozen papers we had and to have this great friendship the country would be diminished by it, because you've been so important to helping guide things through since the financial crisis. So
I appreciate that. I mean, it does suggest that life is a little less linear and predictable than one might think. When I'm asked to give career advice to kids, it's always a disaster, because my story is utterly impossible to replicate. It makes almost no sense to anybody who's trying to decide what to do with one's career.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so this podcast, by tradition, and we've now got 2 months of tradition here on Inside Economics. Hard to believe, right, Chris? Part one is we talk a little bit about the data and our favorite statistics of the week, and we're going to do that in just a second. Part two, and the big topic, and we're going to talk about housing finance, and great to have you here to help with that discussion. And then I'll just kind of bring it all together in part three very quickly. So we always, generally we start with Ryan, because he's a maven on the data. So Ryan, what statistic is top of mind for you today?
This was a hard week. There were so many data points that came out, but I picked 2.3%.
2.3%. 2.3%. 2.3%.
This week is going to be really hard. I mean, there was so much stuff that came out.
Yeah. Do you know, Chris, what that would be? 2.3%?
2.3. No.
I'll give you a clue.
I want to go back to go ahead. What's the clue?
One part of the economy that's booming.
Well, most parts of the economy are booming. What are you talking about? That's not a clue. Oh, come on. You should, if it was like one part of the economy that was not booming, I'd say, okay, 2.3%. Geez, I want to go to the personal consumption report.
Yeah.
No, not good.
No,
okay, I give up. I give up. What is it?
Non-defense capital goods orders.
Oh,
of course.
Yeah, of course.
I know you guys are going to give me crap about the number that I picked, but this is an important one.
It is.
It's important. It feeds into business investment in equipment in the NIPA accounts.
It does.
And it has been really, really strong. So after the number came out, our high frequency GDP model now has real business investment in equipment up 16% annualized in the second quarter.
Oh, so what is GDP in the second quarter now?
It's tracking 9.9%.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's very close. I think our forecast is just a little over 10, isn't it? I believe. Yeah.
I think so. But we're well above the consensus.
Are we really? For Q2, we're above the consensus. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's a good sign. So businesses are investing, feels like they're really kicking into gear. Good.
Yeah, if you look at the investment details of the Q1 GDP revisions, intellectual property investment got revised up a lot, like 6 percentage points.
That's one of your favorite. You say that leads productivity growth, which I guess makes intuitive sense. So that's a good sign. Yeah. Good. Okay. That is a good statistic. I shouldn't have made fun of you, but that was a pretty bad clue. That was a pretty awful clue. Jeez Louise. Okay, Chris, you're up. What's your statistic?
All right, 106.2, down 4.4% from March.
Oh, I know what that is.
Yeah, I got that. I knew you would. It's thematic. What is it?
Actually, I don't know what it is. Hold on, wait a second.
Pending. Yes.
Oh, I was going to say that. That's not
you weren't. You were not going to say that.
That is not fair. I was going to say that. Listener, listen to me. I was going to say that, but they didn't give me a chance to say that. Yeah. Okay.
You had an opportunity, but
yep. See, here's the problem with Chris. Chris always goes to the housing data. Well, Chris, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How big a deal is that? I mean, what is it? What does that mean? And first of all, explain what pending sales are. Well, I think a lot of people don't know what that is.
So pending sales are sales contracts that have not yet closed, right? So that's a leading indicator of home sales, right? So 1-2 months ahead of time.
Yeah.
So I see. So because of that, it's an important statistic to follow because it gives you a sense of where things might be headed. Now things can change. It's not perfect, right? Things could accelerate or slow down, but it's a pretty good leading indicator for housing activity.
Yeah.
It's the lowest it's been since May of last year, May of 2020. So it's at least an indication that things may be slowing down either due to supply constraints. That's what most people chalk it up to. But we also see some data that's suggesting that home buyers are frustrated and some of them are giving up. They're saying, I can't find anything to buy. I'll just stay put, remodel, wait things out, or as a renter, I'm going to enjoy my summer. I'm not going to even try to look for a home.
And what does 106 measure exactly? Like, what is the number?
It's just an index value.
Index, got it.
No one in the world talks about the index itself. They're always looking at the change. So you threw me off initially with 106.
Well, that was intentional.
I knew that. I did know that. I knew that. I was going to say
that was intentional.
That's just not fair. It's not
so
fair.
Existing.
You're young. You pick the draw. You got to give the old guy a little chance to.
All right, I'll give you first tips now. Okay. But pending home sales lead existing by 1 to 2 months.
That sounded patronizing. I'm just saying.
Payback for the last 16 years.
Right. You're doing okay with sticking with me. You're doing fine.
It's fine.
Okay. All right. Okay. I got
a great place to correct him if you feel otherwise.
Yes. Right. Exactly. All right, I got one for you. This is a good one, and I think it's a fair one. 34.6. 34.6. I think Ryan, you should get this one.
And this came out this week.
I think it did. I'm pretty sure it did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Okay. The weeks all blend in together. You know, this whole Zooming thing is messing me up. I don't know if it's this week. I think it's this week. And it is related to the labor market. So related to the job market, but it's not a labor market statistic per se. It's based on a survey.
I know what you have.
Okay, what is it?
No, I'll let Chris guess. Or Jim, because I don't want to get in trouble again.
We see, Jim, this is what we do for fun. We sit around.
Guess this number.
Guess this number.
Well, Ryan's dog behind him has already fallen asleep, so I hate to guess what your listeners are doing.
Oh, boy.
Oh, that was rude.
All right, go for it, Ryan.
Wait, first, wasn't there a game show named that tune?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's the boring version of that.
So it's the Conference Board. Is it the percent of consumers saying jobs are plentiful?
Yep.
All right.
Less percent saying that they're hard to get.
Yep. So it's the labor market differential.
Yeah. The so-called labor market differential. This is the interesting thing about it. 34.6 is about as high as it was in late 2019 before the pandemic, when the labor market was rip-roaring tight, when the unemployment rate was 3.5%. So that would, if that, and that measures a pretty good proxy for unemployment rate, right, Ryan? I mean, it does a pretty good job. Mm-hmm. And you use that in trying to forecast, like for next Friday, we're going to get the jobs number and the unemployment rate data, and you use this statistic to help you estimate what that unemployment rate is going to be.
Yeah, it's one of the inputs. Yeah,
one of the inputs. So that's a very strong number. Suggests the labor market's coming back very, very fast. So the economy is doing well. I remember last week, before we dive into housing, we're going to do that in just a second, we did talk about a few indicators we should be watching on a regular basis. And Chris, you mentioned unemployment insurance. That was also good news, right? On the UI?
Yep. What was it, 404?
404, yep. And that's coming in pretty quickly now. Yeah, very quickly.
It is. So, yeah, all the labor market signs are very positive at this point.
And again, just for context, a really good, the economy's great, everything's perfect, would be 250, weekly unemployment claims. So we're coming in pretty fast here, and that's very good. The other was copper prices. That's a pretty good proxy for broader strength in the global economy and inflationary pressures. I just looked. That was $4.66 a pound, and remember the threshold is if you're over $4, that means things are really booming, and there's a lot of inflationary pressure out there in commodity markets and industrial markets. So that's still very, very strong, very, very close to record highs. And Ryan, you had one too. I can't remember. Oh, sorry, Chris.
I was just going to ask, do you shift that or do you consider at all the shift in demand for electric vehicles and the kind of the greener economy and how that might affect copper prices, at least in a medium term here? Is that threshold? Would you change that? Or
yeah, maybe. No, I don't. I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, certainly not for what we're using it here for. Trying to gauge where we are in kind of the business cycle. Maybe it matters if you look out 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Maybe, it'll start drifting higher, kind of the trend level, the long run level. But I don't know that's a big deal at this point in time. Still not yet. Ryan, you had one too, right? Well, I can't remember what yours was. What's
10-year Treasury Yield?
Oh, and that, what happened there?
It really hasn't budged that much. Nothing. I mean, it's crept lower recently, which is a little bit surprising given the really strong inflation numbers that we've gotten. So it's holding in there, 1.59, 1.6%.
Yeah. Hey, did you happen to notice in the president's budget that came out today that they are assuming a 2.8% 10-year Treasury yield in the long run?
Did you talk to them?
That was not my forecast. That's their forecast. What do you think of that? Is that prudent? Prudently,
so 2.8% in the long run?
Yeah.
They're probably a little low, but
probably a little low.
You probably think they're really low.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think 3.5% is the long run equilibrium, right? So I don't know, 70 basis points low, but it's in the ballpark, I think. Given all the uncertainty here. Okay, all right. Well, that was very good. Although I'm not sure, Ryan's playing. He's just not playing fair.
How is that not fair? It's one of the. Just in the durable goods numbers.
You guys have money riding on this or something? Is there
we do.
We bet.
Some kind of tension here that I'm picking up on.
No, we have a bet. And actually, I lose every bet I have with these guys. So it's like, very disappointing. Okay, so let's talk about housing. And, top of mind is these surging house prices that we're seeing across the country. Did I see, I think FHFA came out with its house price for, I think for the month of April, I believe. And it was 13, 14, 15%, something like that year over year. I think it might be the strongest. Could it be the strongest on record? I'm not quite sure, but the statistics are that the housing price statistics here are, no pun intended, literally through the roof. And the question I'm now getting from clients in media and just everyone is, are we in a bubble? Is this a bubble in the housing market? And I don't know, Jim, do you have any perspective on that?
I'll be curious to hear what you guys say, because I get this question too, and I struggle with it, probably in part because I struggle with the whole concept of a bubble. But to the degree one thinks of a bubble as a spike in demand or caused by a spike in demand that's driven at least in part by less by judgment about sort of underlying economic conditions or realities, and at least in part by the perception of consumers about what other consumers think value looks like. So you're sort of betting on this projection you've got of how others are going to evaluate the same product. And so when it becomes unmoored from underlying sort of economic reality and becomes this social phenomenon in a way, it obviously lends itself to speculation and price spikes, because confidence has this almost geometric impact where everybody's confidence reinforces everybody else's confidence, and off you go. And of course, it makes the heights you hit pretty precarious, because a little bit of doubt then has the same geometric impact going down that it had going up. But here, there's some obvious economic realities that are driving all this. Obviously, you've got supply constraints that are playing a significant role, which you and I have written a fair amount about. And then, you've got this sort of mass migration in reaction to the virus of, so folks looking to buy homes elsewhere. And so it at least started from a place that didn't feel very much like, at least how I think of a bubble. And I guess the question I now struggle with, so I would have said definitively a few months ago, no, it's not a bubble. It's just it's driven by economic reality that's rational in nature. But I can't help but wonder whether or not what began in a very unbubble-like way has begun to take on, at least in some pockets, a bubble-like feature where people see that home prices are going up, even if they're going up for rational economic reasons, and they think differently about the product that is housing, and begin to speculate a little and think about how they value it in ways that feel a little more bubble-like. So I was not concerned a few months ago. I'm a little more concerned now because of that, because I'm not sure if we've transitioned from something that felt unbubble-like to something that might be more bubble-like. That's a very quasi-economist, like one hand on the other hand.
No,
answer, but it's kind of how I feel at the moment.
I think you nailed the definition of a bubble, right? It's kind of when markets get infected by speculation, and speculation is people buying and selling simply based on the idea that they can sell what they bought a couple months ago or several months ago at a higher price with nothing other than that, simply that. So, I think that's what you said. I think that's a very good description of a bubble. Let me ask you, someone was saying this to me yesterday, Jim, that they were concerned that because Fannie and Freddie are not, this is my wife, listener, this is my wife. This is how we communicate when I'm talking to the world. What time is your podcast? It is now. Do I want brownies today?
Okay,
it's my birthday. It's my birthday today. So
it's your birthday today? Oh, you're kidding me, really? Whoa.
Mark has the worst habit. He leaves out all the good stuff until the end of the podcast. Like,
I mean, I think you're making blueberries 10 times. I don't think there is a sticky note that your wife handed you. I think you're just telling the world that it's your birthday. That is such a sad way to announce that it's your birthday.
Yes or no? Yes or no?
I don't know her handwriting. I'm not sure that I buy that.
All right, I'm checking. Why not yes? There's no downside to yes, right?
No, that's fair.
Get some brownies. Okay.
As long as they're straight up brownies. I don't know. This podcast could go sideways pretty quickly.
It's crazy. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, so this was what someone was saying to me yesterday, that I guess Fannie and Freddie are waiving appraisals. I don't know. I think maybe certainly on refi. I'm not sure they're doing it on purchase.
Like a streamline refi, right?
Streamline refi.
I don't think.
And that they thought that this might be contributing to kind of what's going on in the market, because there's no tying it back to any kind of fundamental value, that they're making loans based simply without an appraisal. They feel fine with doing that. Do you sense that as an issue?
No, in fact, I'd heard somewhat the opposite, in the sense that Fannie and Freddie moved to a much higher tolerance for automated appraisals during the virus, because the logistical challenges of actually going out and getting a human being and having them walk around your house when nobody knows who's got the plague, as it were. So they to their credit, took steps to make it easier to get an automated appraisal, so as not to sort of impede closings and the like. And I think many of us had assumed that and other moves towards more automated processes, which will lend themselves to a more sort of digitized, automated sort of housing finance infrastructure, which seems like a good thing, at least in the abstract. I at least had assumed that the virus was going to expedite this transition we were going to see anyway, and that it was going to force FHA to sort of move into the 20th century, if not the 21st century, and all that. And interestingly, what I've heard from clients, and it's just anecdotal, I haven't dug into it yet, FHFA is beginning to roll some of that shift back. And appraisals was an example where they are putting back into place rules that are going to force you to go and get a manual appraisal, where 2 months ago you could have made do with an automated appraisal. That, of course, slows turnaround times up, it increases cost. And so the lenders I've talked to have been complaining about that. So the sense I've gotten, I don't know how illustrative is the bigger problem, but cuts in the other direction.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that until someone had mentioned that yesterday, and I that makes more sense to me. Hey, Chris, I know you've been thinking about this too, and looking at some of the data. It sounds like I think you're kind of landing in the same place that Jim is, right, on this issue about a bubble in the housing market.
Yeah, in terms of that's right. So in terms of the the need for some speculative fervor to define it, right? Leverage isn't a requirement, but certainly would fuel it as well. And we don't see the crazy type of lending going on. And mortgage standards are still relatively tight. So from that perspective, it doesn't sound to me like a bubble. Could we have a correction of some sort? Could things slow down? Certainly, I could see that happening. But I don't see a 2009 style crash anytime soon. So.
Yeah. And of course, we've gotten some data on flips, right? So we get actual transactions, and a flip is defined. We define it as a sale that occurs within 1 year of the previous sale.
Right.
So it's that, and it's arm's length transaction. And I think we found that in the most recent few months, it's been 7-8% of sales. So 7-8% of sales are flips by that definition. And that compares to, in the bubble, something that's at least 3 times that. I think it was like 20-25%, something like that.
That's right.
And actually 7-8% is low by historical standards. Yeah. So
that's
that
right.
kind of gives you a sense that, based on kind of Jim's definition of speculation, that we're not seeing that yet in the market. So market feels highly valued, overvalued, stretched, but hard to conclude that it's a bubble, at least at this point.
I can give you an anecdote, a local anecdote that is probably only worth the value of an anecdote. But we had, where I live in Chapel Hill, we had a lot of sales over the last quarter as home prices, the appreciation of home prices seemed to lure a lot of folks into the market who sort of woke up to realize that their homes were worth more than they realized. And so their tolerance to move had shifted. And so it felt like we had a sudden influx of supply in our community that led to a fair amount of interesting sort of churn. A lot of people moving down from New York and elsewhere because of the virus. There are other dynamics too. But the supply has largely disappeared in town. And the number of homes in various parts of the market have, a fraction of what they were a few months ago. And so the sales have kind of, I would say, dried up. So home prices remain quite high. But if your metric, I would think in a bubble, it's not just prices, it's actual transactions that are a factor in all this. And so in Chapel Hill, if you were to ask the bubble question in terms of home prices, then this month looks just like it did 3 months ago or 4 months ago, but would be very misleading because we don't have much sales, if any. And so it's hard to imagine defining what we've got now here as a bubble when no one's actually buying or selling
transacting
homes. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Hey, Ryan, do you want to weigh in on this question of a bubble? Do you have a different perspective or any thoughts?
No, I agree with everything. I mean, okay. The other thing is it's hard to pin a bubble. Also, I think bubbles can get a lot bigger before they pop, and it's hard to predict that. But I also think it's this demand is going to remain strong for the next few years, which means house prices are likely going to be rising year in and year out because of the millennials. You get a huge wave of millennials that are coming into their prime first-time home buying age.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, another fundamental reason for the view that the market may be overvalued and may go sideways here a little bit when interest rates start to rise, but won't crash. It's not a bubble bursting. Is the supply side and Jim, you were alluding to this and talking about it. Supply side of the market is very constrained, both in terms of inventory for sale, but also in terms of new housing supply. And you and I recently wrote a paper about this. And it would be good to get your perspective on how big a deal you think this issue is around affordable housing supply.
Yeah, it's a real mess. I don't envy the policymaker community at all having to deal with it because it's creating a pretty brutal affordability problem right in the part of the market where you don't want it, which is entry-level homes in areas with jobs, right? I mean, it's just the worst possible sort of headwind you could come up with because it affects, labor mobility. It affects the ability of folks to get into homeownership to begin with, and all that. And then it's being driven by a bunch of factors that largely fall outside of the normal housing policy toolkit. It's being driven by immigration policy and education policy that's affecting labor costs. It's being driven by trade policy that's affecting the cost of materials. It's being driven by municipality level decision making that's affecting the cost of land because of zoning and the like. And so if you're if you had my old job and you're sitting at the NEC and you're trying to come up with what tools in my toolkit am I going to deploy to deal with this problem, it's not obvious which ones you latch onto. And until they deal with it, until you at least shrink the size of the problem, it kind of freezes them in place on a bunch of other issues. So, for instance, they're rightfully concerned about the racial homeownership gap, but it's not quite clear what you do with big demand side solutions that aren't going to get folded into home prices. If you've got limited stock and you give a broad segment of population more money to spend, there's a concern that all you're going to do is drive up pricing and not really, help expand home ownership in any sort of obvious way. And so it's both hard to solve, or it's both important and hard to solve, and it's got ripple effects that really affect sort of the whole housing policy landscape in a way that is pretty unnerving. So I think it's a big deal, and I think it's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah. And Chris, you've done a lot of work in this area too. Do you have a sense of the size of the problem? I mean, the scale of the problem? Can you give us any context in terms of that?
it's a little tricky, right? It depends on how you want to measure it, right? If you look at, rental or the strain on renters today, renters are more strained, but they're actually less strained, right? Fewer are severely burdened relative to 2011. So, I think we have to be a little cautious here, not to overemphasize the problem. Clearly, there is an affordable housing issue, but I'm not sure, to your point, Jim, I don't think we're actually focusing on the right tools to address it. If we focus on the inputs, wages, lumber, all of these things, these will adjust. These markets will adjust. From my mind, it's the zoning that's the real issue, and it's gotten some attention now in the latest Biden plan, but it's still very, very small relative to all the other programs that are trying to emphasize, really putting more money throwing more money at the problem. But until we solve the zoning issue, we're not going to create or build out a lot more supply here.
Well, what would you have them do, Chris? I mean, the federal government has limited tools to address what's going on at a local level, particularly around zoning. So what would you have them do?
They have some tools, and I think there was a good start. In the latest proposal I saw, there's $5 billion allocated to provide grants to areas that do address their exclusionary zoning issues. So more of a carrot approach, right? So address the zoning, and government will give additional funds. I think that's a good approach. But you're right; it is tricky given the local politics. But I think that's probably the best we can do. But I would certainly put much more emphasis on that part of the plan than the other parts. I mean, increasing the trust fund, that's good, that's helpful, but it's not going to really increase the supply as much as
you mean the housing trust fund?
Correct.
The housing trust fund, which is I think the biggest part of the most costly part of
correct
what President Biden has proposed is to expand the housing trust fund, which goes to building out affordable rental property, right?
Yeah, low to moderate income.
Yeah, right.
Subsidies, right?
Yeah.
The zoning stuff, though, it's interesting because I think we discovered in the last election cycle how controversial it can be. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly that it's at the center of the thicket of challenges and all this, and until you deal with it aggressively, it's hard to see how you solve much of the problem. I mean, other tools will help for sure, but zoning strikes me as maybe the biggest impediment of all. But and it seems like $5 billion is given the scale of the problem, is a pretty small carrot to wave around unless you're going to give it to one community. So either they need a much larger carrot or a stick, and the stick problem is if you think back to the most recent election, the only way housing made it in to the general election was when Trump brought up scary high rises in white suburban America. I mean, he dropped the race card just as clearly as one could drop it. And it was focused on affirmatively furthering fair housing. So it was a slightly different variation of all this, but it is very easy to see how you could sweep in any aggressive move to use a stick here to that populist sort of narrative of, scary people in high rises coming and threatening soccer moms, which is essentially what Trump was suggesting. So I agree that in an ideal world, that's probably where you got to go, and you probably have to have a stick. It's probably not just a carrot. It's probably tying transportation funds to a communities being open to inclusionary zoning. Mark and I've written about this before, or it's tying more HUD funding that these communities depend on to some steps on inclusionary zoning. So it's probably those are sort of passive aggressive, carrots maybe, so you're getting all this money anyway, but we're not going to give it to you anymore unless you play nice. But the moment they play that card, they better be ready to play some pretty rough politics over this because of, I think the whistle that Trump blew in the last election. That's not to say they shouldn't do it, but I think that's probably one of the reasons why they went a little small on this in their proposal.
Well, I guess the $5 billion, it's almost like a pilot, right? I mean, let's see if it works. Let's see what kind of behavioral response we get from local governments. How much will they engage with us on this?
Yeah, fair enough.
And you do have some experiments going on around the country, right? In Portland, Minnesota, right? You have some areas that are are upzoning. They're trying, so we'll get some data off of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the way I view the Biden housing proposal, as everyone, as most people know now, because we've been talking about it on this podcast for quite a bit, and I know you're all careful listeners of Inside Economics. In the American Jobs Plan, that's the infrastructure proposal that President Biden put forward back now probably 6-8 weeks ago. Housing is part of that. If you add it all up, it's almost $300 billion in additional support. Chris, you mentioned the Housing Trust Fund. That's the biggest piece of that. It's $300 billion over 10 years. And sort of my sense of it is that it's kind of a second best solution. So, the political landmines and just the practicality of trying to get local governments to change their zoning, that's a process at best. That's going to take a while to actually get results there. But the second best solution is let me provide funding to help build. Let's go build. LIHTC credits for, low income rental, housing trust fund, grants, direct grants, more money for, public the capital fund for public housing, the home program. Jim, is that a fair way, do you think, of thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to oversimplify what we mean when we say there's a housing supply problem. There are like 15 different versions of a housing supply. Cleveland's got one version, Detroit's got a slightly different one, Seattle's got a different chapter. So the fact that it's feels like a bit of a hodgepodge, I'm not sure is a criticism, at least to me, because it feels like what they've done is they have put together a mix of block grants for some communities that can spend the money to solve their idiosyncratic challenges in a way that's appropriate. Investments that will, like to CDFIs and the like, that will hopefully attract private capital to help solve the problem a bit. So tax credits that will also bring some more private capital to bear. So it feels like they've come up with a pretty wide range of tools, which shouldn't have surprised us ex ante, because there are a pretty wide range of impediments to all this. So if I had a criticism, it would be twofold. One, I wish they were a little more aggressive on the zoning piece, but that's not an end all be all. There are more problems in zoning, and they've hit the other problems pretty hard. And then my second criticism, which isn't necessarily a criticism of the White House, it's more of the political policy culture generally, is it just hasn't gotten enough attention. I mean, this strikes me as a pretty significant problem that flows through to a lot of other economic sort of policies that we are paying more attention to, whether it's broadband or bridges and roads or whatever. But somehow housing, it just hasn't broken into a top tier kind of category for people to lock onto, and I'm more critical of that than I am of the specifics of what they've actually proposed. So if they, in other words, if we saw everything they proposed make it through, I think it wouldn't solve the problem in its entirety because of zoning and some other things, and because this will take a long time to solve anyway. But it'll go about as far as they could go without fixing zoning. So my concern is more like, are we going to see this whole package get through anyway? Or are they going to settle for focusing on other areas that need more attention? So I'm a little more nervous about that than I am about what they've actually proposed.
Yeah. How would you handicap things at this point? Do you think a package will get through that will include some of the housing related?
So I think yes. I think eventually, once the dust settles and we've seen, whatever regular order stuff get passed, and the reconciliation stuff get through, I think you'll see, at least in the reconciliation package, housing as a part of that. What the size is, I don't know. It probably depends on what Manchin's willing to spend by way of tax increases. I do worry, though, that if they've got to lower their overall expenditure in this, that housing is one of the first to get downsized. So I'm a little nervous that it winds up being, half of what they proposed. It seems, though, that it's very unlikely to make it into any regular order package, out of a bipartisan agreement. It seems like the Republicans have, for reasons I don't quite follow, defined infrastructure in a way that just has no room for housing. And so that's just not going to find its way into their to a bipartisan package, but I'm pretty comfortable that assuming there's a reconciliation package to follow, it'll make its way into that. I'm just a little worried that it's not as big as what they've put on the table.
Yeah. It's interesting if you do the arithmetic and they've got the total $300 billion package through, that would create, by my calculation, a couple million homes on top of all the other homes that will be built without the support. And that's almost exactly equal to what my estimate would be of the shortage. So if I look at the shortfall today, and the way I do that is I just look at the vacancy rate across the housing stock today compared to its long run average. The difference is the shortage. And if you do the arithmetic, that comes up to 1.5, 1.6 million units. And then if you look at current supply, new supply, and compare that to underlying demand for new housing, household formation, obsolescence, second vacation homes, we're shy by about 100,000 a year. So if you kind of do the arithmetic, it comes up to about a couple million. So that feels like what we need. We need something like that to address this in a reasonable amount of time in the next 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. So I did want to ask about the president's. You remember back in the campaign when President then candidate Biden talked about housing, he often talked about it in the context of down payment assistance. It was a way for him to talk about the racial equity gap, wealth gap. And big part of that is the fact that communities of color have home ownership rates that are meaningfully below white households. And and that goes a long way to explaining the difference in wealth between households of color and white households. So, you got to get people into homes so they can build wealth. And his kind of go-to solution, and you could, every time he had a town hall or an interview, this came up, it was down payment assistance. It was I think it was a $15,000 tax credit that was refundable and advanceable, which was the really interesting thing about it. Meaning you when you closed on the home, the money was sitting there so that you could actually close on the home.
Magically.
Yeah.
It was a magic wand solution.
Yeah. So I know you thought a lot about that. So I'm curious, what do you think of that down payment assistance program in the context of all the supply issues?
Yeah.
How would you address that?
Yeah. So I go back to, I don't envy the policymaker set right now, because this too is a difficult challenge. So my sense is that if they were to deploy a vastly broad-based down payment assistance program where all first-time home buyers, which is the way it was framed, get $15,000 towards a down payment, it's really hard for me to see how that doesn't get folded into, or some large part doesn't get folded into home prices. So my guess is the reason why you haven't seen it folded into their proposals thus far is they're struggling a bit with how to make good on that campaign promise in a way that is actually effective. And I think the solution is to target the down payment assistance in a way that goes after the part of the problem that he has talked about going after, which is the racial wealth gap. And to the way you described it is exactly right. They, I think, correctly view the racial home ownership gap is playing a pretty significant role in the racial wealth gap. And so the flip side of that is closing the racial home ownership gap can play a significant role in closing the racial wealth gap. So my sense is if they can find a way to target the down payment assistance to try to do that, as opposed to helping everybody that's going to buy the first home, they can target it in a way that makes it small enough not to further distort the market by folding all this into home prices, yet meaningfully help solve the problem they're trying to help. So for instance, Urban did a blog, it wasn't me, but some others at Urban did a blog in which they show that if you were to limit down payment assistance, not just by area median income, which is how people traditionally think about it, but by area median income and those whose parents didn't own a home or don't currently own a home, there are variations on this first generation idea, then roughly 2/3 of the recipients of the subsidy are families of color. Whereas if you remove that first generation filter, however it's defined, the number drops to like 40%. And the reason for that is a lot of folks that are below 120 area median income, which is often the threshold people talk about here, it gets overwhelmed by folks who are LMI, low moderate income, only because they're 25 years old, who aren't going to be, low moderate income in 4 or 5 years once they're out of college a ways. And that's arguably not who we should be targeting an enormous subsidy to. So if you filter that out and you target it to people whose parents didn't own a home, and as a result, they don't have mom and dad to lean on for down payment, and you go and provide down payment assistance for that group, they're the ones who arguably need it, then the equities of the targeting make a lot more sense, and the numbers get a lot smaller. That is, you're helping a small enough number of people that the overall subsidy doesn't get lost in home price necessarily. So I'm not sure whether that's the right set of filters exactly, but it feels like it's that kind of solution that they're going to need to sort of land on in order to do good and not see half of the good they're trying to do washed away in home prices.
In home prices. And I know you and I have been working on a kind of a different approach to helping bridge that racial equity gap. And I'd like you to describe that idea, and then we're going to ask Chris and Ryan whether they like the idea. I don't think they know. I haven't talked about this with them. So go ahead and describe the idea.
Well, for the record, for listeners who can't see you, Mark had a very serious look on his face when he asked them to opine on this. So I'm not sure. I'll discount the honesty.
No. I want to hear the unvarnished.
Now you look mean again. See again, listeners. I'm just letting you. I want you full transparency.
I don't do that. Yeah, we're 1,000 flowers, intellectual flowers bloom.
Mean again. Don't buy it, listeners. Don't buy it. Okay, so the idea of the program is at a high level pretty simple, which is come up with a loan product for a certain targeted set of borrowers. And we too were thinking about this sort of first generation low moderate income group of folks as the ideal target. For those folks, offer a product where they can take out an FHA loan that has monthly payments that are roughly equal to what a loan through FHA of the same size would have been in a 30-year product, yet this product will be a 20-year product. So in essence, you're locking in whatever they would have qualified for at FHA. So hopefully it's something they can afford, at least vis-a-vis the FHA sort of underwriting system. But putting them into a 20-year loan instead, and the logic there is, it's ideally it's affordable because you've solved for what they could have qualified for in a 30-year, but they're going to build wealth at roughly twice the clip that they would have in a 30-year. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, it's pretty remarkable because of the amortization schedule. You're roughly building twice the equity at the 3-year mark, the 5-year mark, the 10-year mark, sort of all the way through that you would in a 30-year. The numbers are just pretty remarkable that way. And so if you put folks into that product, two things happen. One, their risk profile diminishes pretty quickly. They wind up with enough equity in the home that the severity of loss to FHA drops pretty dramatically, pretty quickly. And secondly, they obviously build wealth at a much greater clip than they would have in a 30-year. And so that's sort of the idea. And we can get into the mechanics of how you actually do it, which is sort of behind the scenes and maybe not relevant. And the politics of this, which are mildly interesting, and then I'll stop and let you guys opine, is it's got a bit more bipartisan appeal than normal down payment assistance does. The whole 20-year fast amortizing loan has been a conservative sort of idea for a long time anyway. And if you target it in a way that has a particular strength among families of color, there's a way to dock that thinking, the logic that conservatives have brought to this, to what's been a recently pretty strongly strongly felt progressive policy, which is trying to marshal home ownership as a lever to close the racial wealth gap. So the hope is we can get some bipartisan appeal here to push something that, at the end of the day, we estimated it's 3 to 4 million folks over is it 5 years, Mark? I forget.
I think we came up with 2 million over the 5-year period. Okay. 2 million over the 5 years. We had a budget constraint, so go figure. They gave us a budget and said, what can you do with this budget? And we said with 25 billion over the next 4 or 5 years, we expect 2 million homeowners to benefit from this. Yeah.
Anyway, that was a long-winded explanation, but do you get the concept? I mean, it's a pretty straightforward concept.
What do you guys think? What do you if honest opinion? Really, just go ahead. What do you think, Chris? You first.
Me first. All right.
Chris is always cautious. He's a very cautious.
No. I'll jump right in.
Now he's going to come with like 10 questions. And,
no question. Okay. I've heard a lot of these pitches over the years, right? I've been in the mortgage industry a long time.
It doesn't sound good.
No, that's my preamble. So yeah, it sounds great. It sounds like a lot like a graduated equity mortgage, or effectively you're subsidizing the rate, right?
Yeah.
So all good, all nice. But again, I've seen a lot of these programs, a lot of pilots, and they all they have a certain success, but they never reach the critical mass. So I think that's fine. I think it's good to try, but I don't see this as the real issue. I think it's more about financial literacy, education, providing opportunities. Those are the real issues that I see here. And to be honest, I think you can approximate what you're doing already with a 30-year mortgage. I don't know if we need another product type out there to accomplish this. So that's my view. I've seen a lot of these. It's a good idea, but I don't see it as the root cause of the issue here.
In terms of the take, it sounds like you're saying that it may not get the take up we expect it to get. Is that kind of when you say critical mass? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the take. There's also I don't know. I guess you're going to hold these on portfolio. There's the liquidity perspective of this. I guess this is you're saying this is a government program. We're just going to hold it on the balance sheet.
We'd securitize another Ginny security. Yeah, but
okay. It's subsidized.
It's definitely subsidized. Yeah.
It's not going to be terribly liquid though, right? It's right, I don't know how the investor would look at
exactly.
it.
Yeah, those are all reasonable concerns. Yeah, very reasonable.
You've got to. I mean, this is not to get too far into the hood, but the idea would be Treasury, frankly, buys MBS backed by these loans at a premium sufficient to get lenders to make them. They in turn sell them into the secondary market at a discount large enough to attract investors. And that's how you sort of generate the liquidity. And the 25 billion is just the sum of those two subsidies. And the thinking is, we talked to some secondary market folks, and their assumption is that the prepay speeds on these things will be like zero. No one's going to prepay out of these things because of the discounted rate. And so there will be, if you get the discount right, there will be a decent market for them because they'll be a relatively secure investment over a period of time. But it just depends on how much is subsidized both ends.
Yeah, my sense is that home buyers are very, very sensitive to the monthly payment. So if you give them a 20-year mortgage with a monthly payment that's anywhere in the ballpark of a 30-year, why wouldn't I do that, right? I mean, for the same monthly payment, I can build equity twice as fast, over the next decade, something like that. So I'm not sure take up would be an issue. It depends on how you price it. I mean, if you get close enough to the 30, I don't know why you wouldn't get take up. Or do you have a different?
Yeah, but you're going to.
So sure.
No, I think that's true, but you're going to limit the population significantly that qualifies for this. That population has to know about it. They have to be interested. They have to be.
Right.
There's a lot of skepticism out there about all these new products. So.
Well, you heard Jim sell it. So if Jim sells it, no, there's not going to be a problem.
There you go.
No problem. He's going to do that.
I wish you all the best. I'm just skeptical.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's all fair. All very reasonable. Ryan, do you have a perspective on that?
Well, until Chris chimed in, I really liked it. I mean, you guys are the housing experts, so I'm going to leave it to you. But Chris is, the party pooper.
No, come on.
Yeah. And then with regards to the secondary market, couldn't the Fed play a role in this? I mean, they're already buying MBS under MBS under the sun. They could, and then that's how you kind of link their new initiative of all-inclusive type recovery. I mean, yes, they're going to aim for low unemployment rates.
That's an interesting thought.
And then you get them to be, they purchase this.
So you say to Chair Powell, hey, Chair Powell, this is a way to use monetary policy to help become a more inclusive economy. That's interesting.
Correct. Yeah. Or address the wealth inequality. And Powell's chimed in on this, all the time.
I mean, to be clear, it's a. I don't mean to be overly defensive about this. It's not intended to solve. Like if you were to come up with a list of the housing problems of the day, which we spent the first chunk of the podcast talking about, like this isn't a supply side thing. This doesn't expand home ownership. Like it's not intended to do any of that. It's intended to simply accelerate the sort of utility of home ownership as a wealth building tool for those that that need it most. So it's not meant to be a grand slam. It's sort of like a double when you need it, kind of thing.
Well, and it also fits in the context of the current environment, right? Because if you do something that juices up demand, it's counterproductive. That's not what this does. It's not about creating new demand. It's about, for those people who are going to become homeowners, helping them build that wealth more quickly, over time. But okay, well, very good. I can't believe it. I think an hour has passed. So I think we probably should call it quits. I did want to say that, I've been a professional economist for 30 plus years. This is my birthday, by the way. Did I tell you that? It was my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I've spent a lot of time and energy on the housing and housing finance market. Of course, I'll give you my 3 cents about almost anything, but housing and housing finance has always been front and center for me. And that goes to the fact that housing is so central to a well-functioning economy. It feels like every single business cycle, housing finance has something to do with what's going on in that business cycle. And that clearly was the case 10 years ago. It was, go back to the 1990s, the S&L crisis. And, even today we've got, different set of problems in the housing finance markets, but problems that are, difficult and, really make a difference in people's lives. So it's been a very important place for me to focus my attention. And I think that we have some very large problems here with regard to home ownership and for getting people into home ownership with the severe affordable supply issues we have. And we really do need to focus policy on addressing these questions. And hopefully in the debate and discussion that's going on now in Washington, housing does take on a more central role, because without addressing the housing issues, the affordability issues, the home ownership issues, a lot of these other problems that policymakers are trying to address will be much more difficult to solve. So it's a very critical issue for Washington to focus on. And hopefully we see more of that over the next few weeks, few months. So with that, we're going to call it a podcast. I want to thank you for listening in. I did want to say, if you have any questions for us, I know I've said this a couple weeks now, but we're collecting questions. But if you have any questions for us or any topics you want us to address, please let us know. We have, what's the URL that we have? I can't remember. Is it Inside Economics? What is it? Does anyone remember what the
email?
The email.
Yeah, the email. Yeah. The email address. Well,
okay.
What is the email address?
Go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead.
InsideEconomics@Moodys.com.
At Moodys.com. InsideEconomics@Moodys.com. Okay, that's our email address. Please fire away, and we're going to answer those questions in the not too distant future. So with that, thank you, and we'll be back next week.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Mark.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, guys.